More silly season dominoes have fallen in NASCAR as Chastain has signed a multi-year contract extension with Trackhouse Racing. Todd Gilliam will drive for Rick Ware Racing for 5 races in 2023, and Kevin Hart plans to make 0 friends throughout his final full-time season. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to go ahead and start to talk about Richmar Flores. As it was announced yesterday that Richmar Flores is going to sponsor Ryan Ellis for multiple races in 2023. This will include Auto Club next weekend and also at Pocono Racer, where they'll have a special car for Ryan Ellis and probably a couple other races as well they're going to sponsor. Really excited to see Richmar Flores continue to sponsor Ryan Ellis. I believe they sponsored Ryan Ellis in a couple races last year, so really excited to see that they will continue sponsoring him in 2023. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about STP. As it was announced earlier today that STP is going to be returning to Legacy Motor Club to sponsor them for their 52nd year in a row. STP has been a longtime partner of the Richard Petty brand for many years, for 52 years now. So this is absolutely incredible. I wonder if we'll get a paint scheme maybe this year. If they do, I think that'd be really exciting and really great. I hope it does happen, and it's very good to see that they will continue sponsoring the Legacy Motor Club brand in 2023. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Powerball. As it was announced yesterday morning that Powerball has signed with NASCAR as an official partner of NASCAR. This is the first sporting league that is going to have Powerball as a partner. This is absolutely incredible. The Powerball, everyone knows about the Powerball. I think it's absolutely incredible. The fact that this is the first sporting league that is going to be part of this, of NASCAR, even the sporting league in general, I think is absolutely incredible and absolutely amazing. So I think this is absolutely amazing for the sport, and very happy to see that Powerball has joined it as a big partner. Really exciting stuff, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Walmart. Now, Walmart's already been making a big splash in NASCAR very recently, but it was reported earlier today by multiple outlets, including JSK.com, that there is a Walmart store that's going to be coming to the Geico campground at Phoenix Raceway. This is absolutely huge for the Phoenix Raceway area, and this is absolutely huge for NASCAR in general. The fact that a Walmart is building in Phoenix, that's really going to build up the Phoenix area for sure, and I think this is absolutely amazing and great to see that they are doing. So I think this is massively huge, and very happy to see that building a Walmart. This is really huge for the sport in general. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Verizon. Now, Bob Pires reported on this earlier today, but it was announced today that NASCAR and Verizon have announced that Verizon has put more than 450,000 feet of cabling for wireless connectivity at Daytona to improve the Wi-Fi at the track, the suites, and the grandstands as well. This is really huge, your internet connection. One thing about Daytona is I think it is the best racetrack. I've never been there, but a lot of people say that Daytona is the best racetrack, and the fact that they're working on trying to fix the Wi-Fi issues, because that's one thing when it comes to NASCAR, especially when it comes to racetracks in general. One thing Formula One has really gotten heads on is basically being able to have really good Wi-Fi and really good internet at these tracks. You got to get everything, bit of the facilities up, and to me, this is a really great step in that right direction. Daytona's always been ahead in that front, in that area, and overall, I think this is really great to see and amazing to see that Verizon has done this. This is really awesome. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Ken Block and Travis Pastrana. Now, Travis Pastrana invited Ken Block's wife and daughter out to the racetrack in support of Travis Pastrana during qualifying to watch him qualify in the Daytona 500. Now, Travis Pastrana we're going to talk about here in just a little bit, but I think that's absolutely incredible to see that Travis Pastrana brought out Ken Block's wife and family. I think it's just so cool. I know Holly Kane brought this up on Twitter. I think this is absolutely amazing to see, and just a great moment for the sport in general, a great moment in general. If you haven't seen the video and stuff, it's absolutely emotional. I definitely suggest you can go and check that out. But really awesome, exciting stuff, and amazing to see that Ken Block's family was brought out. I think that's really awesome, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about NASCAR 75. As it was announced yesterday morning that NASCAR is going to be doing a 75 greatest drivers list, and it will be revealed on Monday. Now in May, I should say. Now, one thing you know is that in the of course in 1998, which is the 50th year of NASCAR, NASCAR also did a 50 greatest drivers list. Now, the big question is going to be is are they going to take some of the names off there on that list, or are they going to keep the 50 names on there and add 25 more people? Because things have changed, especially with the lower series. Things have changed in the last 25 years. And I'm very intrigued to see what NASCAR is going to do, if they're going to take some of those names off that list, or they're going to go ahead and just add the names from the 50 that are on there. Because some people are not going to recognize some of the names on that list, like Ray Hendrick. I wonder if that will be something that NASCAR decides to do. That being said, though, I think this is absolutely great if they're going to be doing this once again. They'll probably do it for the 100th anniversary of the sport as well, which, of course, is 25 years away. In general, I think it's really exciting that they're doing this and amazing for the sport overall in general that this is something that they're going to be doing. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Alex Bowman in Daytona 500 pole qualifying. Now, Alex Bowman, for like he's been for the last 6 or 7 years, he ended up winning the pole once again. It will start in the front row for the 6th straight year. Alex Bowman, it needs to be noted that in the last 11 years, only 3 times has the pole been 1/10 over the second place car in Daytona 500 qualifying. That's 2018, 2021, and 2023. Guess who's the driver to do it all 3 times? Alex Bowman. Alex Bowman is just built different during qualifying. It doesn't matter the engineers. It doesn't matter the crew chiefs. It doesn't matter what it is. Basically, Alex Bowman's team is just really good at making those cars really, really fast, and they focus on Daytona 500 qualifying. Of course, they back the car up in the Daytona duels. We're going to talk about those here very, very shortly. But like I mentioned and already said, the fact that Alex Bowman has done this now 3 times in the last 11 years is just incredible. And seeing how dominant the 48 team is, especially in Daytona qualifying, is absolutely amazing. So great stuff for sure. And overall, this incredible new stuff to see overall for sure, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Daytona 500 qualifying. Now, the ratings have come out for Daytona 500 qualifying, and they're somewhat promising. So, earlier tonight, according to Adam Stern, FS1 got 795,000 viewers for Daytona 500 qualifying. That is up 6% from last year, which has 747,000 viewers. This is really good news. The Daytona 500 qualifying is up. Yes, 795,000 viewers on FS1. That's not the greatest number overall, but the fact that more people will tune in this year than last year is at least a good thing because it shows that more people are tuning in to these qualifying sessions. And I think overall, in general, that is a really, really good thing for the sport because every time the ratings go up, the better it is for the sport. And it might give us also a little bit hype for Daytona 500. Now, I do want to say that one of the reasons I think the ratings were up was because Travis Pastrana and Jimmy Johnson were attempting to qualify for the Daytona 500. They were using a lot of their social media presence, and they were helping build up some hype for the Daytona 500. So overall, in general, this is really, really good stuff where the ratings are up. I think this, in general, is a massive, massive, and a major, major positive for the sport in general, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about Wendy's versus McDonald's. We got food wars and fast food wars once again in NASCAR as Adam Stern put out a tweet earlier today talk about Wendy's and McDonald's. Now, of course, Wendy's and McDonald's are going to be sponsoring in this year's Daytona 500. Wendy's is going to be sponsoring Noah Gragson, and McDonald's is going to be sponsoring Bubba Wallace. Now, Adam Stern put this tweet out, and he says that Carl Laredo on the QSR Wars in Daytona 500. We're proud of Noah Gragson's number 42 What is the Beef car, and fans have praised the scheme all week long on social media. We can't say the same goes for our McBland competitors as Wendy's. We don't cut corners. I love this. I absolutely love the fact that you're getting fast and wars in NASCAR once again, especially with 2 brands like Wendy's and McDonald's that are sponsoring. I'm going to say one thing, though. The Wendy's car is absolutely beats the McDonald's scheme. The McDonald's car, in my opinion, that Bubba Wallace is running, this is no disrespect to Bubba Wallace or 2311 Racing, but this scheme is like a show car, or basically like a test car that they can run. There's nothing going on with the scheme. It's so bland. It's so boring. And there's nothing going on. It's one of my least favorite paint schemes so far of the year. Compared to the Wendy's car, where that scheme is absolutely much better, and it's got better branding than the McDonald's scheme. I just think the McDonald's scheme in general is a lot boring, and I think in this instance, in this front, I think the Wendy's car 100% defeat the McDonald's car on all fronts when it comes to everything. Plus the social media presence as well. I think it 100% beats it. But that's just my opinion. But I love the fact that we've got food wars and fasting wars once again in NASCAR with Wendy's and McDonald's. I hope this continues this year and we see both of them as sponsored in the sport. I think in general, it's really, really good for the sport in general, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Corey LaJoie. As Corey LaJoie confirmed on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio earlier this week that Corey LaJoie will run the Truck Series race at Darlington with Spire Motorsports in the Truck Series in the number 7 truck. Now, I don't remember if this had been announced or not for sure, but of course, Corey LaJoie will be competing or attempting to qualify for the Truck Series opener at Daytona in the number 7 for Spire Motorsports, which I believe will be his first Truck Series start in his career up to this point. But it's great to see that Corey LaJoie will be competing at Darlington because Corey LaJoie thinks a very talented driver. Spire will likely have Hendrick's stuff, and I expect that truck will be very, very fast. I remember last year when they were how fast that truck was at times. It won a race, of course, with William Byron last year, and I would anticipate and imagine that truck is going to be as fast as it was in 2022 at times. Roger also had some good runs going in that truck, but had some issues as well. But she was a fast in truck practice today, so that's some really, really good stuff. That being said, though, it's good to see that Corey LaJoie will be competing in the Truck Series a little bit more. Maybe we're going to see him in more than 2 races. He does say that their schedule with Spire could have more drivers. There's rumblings that a driver who drove for Spire last year in the Truck Series might be driving in the truck once again. So last year. So we'll have to wait and see what happens, but we'll see what happens going down the road. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Connor Daly. As Connor Daly confirmed to the media yesterday that he will run at least in 4 Cup Series races in 2023 with the Money Team. He will, of course, run in the Daytona 500. He will also run a Circuit Americas and also run at the Indy Road Course. So potentially 3 more races that he can run. I think it's really great to see that Connor Daly is going to be running in multiple races in the Cup Series with the Money Team. Granted, the Money Team is not the fastest organization in the world, but in general, I think it's really good for the sport to have a driver like Connor Daly around because he's got a really good personality. And in general, like I said, in my opinion, I think it's great for the sport to see that he's able to go out and, have fun and enjoy what he wants to do and go out and race. Plus, he's running, of course, full-time in IndyCar, which I think that's great in general as well. So, great stuff overall for sure that we'll see Connor Daly in multiple races this upcoming season. Maybe he'll run in more. I love that he's transitioning a little bit to NASCAR. I know he said he's wanted to eventually maybe go full-time in the future. But in general, I think this is a really, really good start to seeing him do this. So really good stuff for sure, and awesome to see that we've got Connor Daly attempting to do some races in 2023 in NASCAR. Really exciting stuff for sure, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Daytona 500. Now, it was basically put out by NASCAR's social media page that this is the first time that the reigning Cup Series, the Xfinity Series, and the Truck Series drivers, champions, will all be racing in the Daytona 500 at the same time. Of course, last year, Joe Logano won the NASCAR Cup Series Championship, and of course, he's competing in the Daytona 500. You've got Ty Gibbs, who won the Xfinity Series Championship in the 54 for Joe Gibbs Racing. And we have Zane Smith, who qualified for the Daytona 500 earlier this evening in the number 36 for Farmer Motorsports, racing his way in. That is absolutely wild, the fact that basically that this is the first time it's ever happened. I thought this had happened before, but I did a little bit of research. I'm like, yeah, that's absolutely true. This is the first time that this has happened. So I think this is phenomenal and amazing to see that this is happening. And it just shows that you've got a lot of talent in the sport, and you've got drivers that deserve it. Zane Smith deserves to be in there. Ty Gibbs deserves to be in there. And Joe Logano for sure 100% deserves to be in there. So really exciting and awesome stuff, and amazing to see that we're going to see all 3 of those drivers in. I think it's great for the sport in general, and really exciting to see that all 3 drivers have made it in the 500 for this year, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Hailie Deegan. Now, I talked about this on the channel a couple days ago, but we talked about the fact that Monster Energy had not been really been spotted on her fire suits and also was not on her truck. Well, according to Bob Pockers, he reported earlier today that Hailie Deegan still has a deal with Monster, and they are likely going to sponsor her throughout the 2023 season. This is really, really good to see because there have been a lot of concern if they were going to sponsor Hailie Deegan in 2023. And the reason I say that is because they're focusing on 3 other drivers in 2023. Of course, they're focusing on Tyler Reddick this year, who's, of course, driving for 2311 and will be on that 45 car. Ty Gibbs in the 54, who will have a majority sponsor with Monster, and they've kind of backed that off. And also Riley Herbst, who will be sponsored in the 98, will have Monster Energy as that sponsor as well. I think in general, it's really great to see that she will be sponsored and has that deal with Monster. In general, I think this is really, really fantastic and really, really great in general to see. And like I said, I'm very pumped and excited and, like I said, very happy that Monster is going to continue sponsoring. I think it's really good in general. And, you know, I was worried about it. I wonder how many races they actually will sponsor this year. That's going to be one thing to watch and to see what happens. But in general, I'm very happy to see that Hailie Deegan will still have that deal with Monster. Really awesome and really exciting stuff, and happy to see that they're going to continue having their deal in 2023. Very exciting and really, really great stuff for the sport in general, to be honest with you. Now we'll go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jimmie Johnson and Travis Pastrana. Now after both drivers basically qualified their way in the Daytona 500 speed, Jimmie Johnson being the fastest of the open cars and Travis Pastrana being the second fastest of the open cars with the 2 fastest cars and the 2 fastest budgets and the 2 best budgets at the time. They both were extremely excited they're both going to be in the Daytona 500 and didn't have to worry about racing in. Now, obviously, they still could have been the best open car, but that would have been the 3rd and the 4th best cars, and they were the best in their open races. They would have qualified in. But they spoke to the media, and they were extremely excited about racing in the Daytona 500 against each other, especially Travis Pastrana, who was extremely pumped up, excited that he'll be racing in the Daytona 500 for the first time and racing his first NASCAR Cup Series race. I think in general it's really amazing for the sport that the 2 biggest stories of the open cars, that being Jimmie Johnson, 7-time NASCAR Cup Series champion, returning to the NASCAR Cup Series for the first time since 2020, and Travis Pastrana, who's not raced in NASCAR that much recently, has not raced in a truck since like 2013 when he drove for Roush Fenway Racing, or RFK, when it was Roush Fenway Racing before it became RFK. I think in general it's really massive in general for the sport, and the headlines have been absolutely incredible. I think this is massive and huge for the sport in general, and I think it's amazing to see that both drivers have qualified for this year's Daytona 500 on speed. Really great for the sport, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Daytona duels. Now, of course, earlier tonight were the Daytona duels to determine which open cars were able to get in. Now, obviously, you still had a race that happened. Joe Logano won duel number 1 and Eric Almirola won duel number 2. So the big question is, who got in from the duels? Let's go through duel number 1. Duel number 1 was pretty straightforward, and Zane Smith was able to make it in. Zane Smith had the best race of the 3 open cars, of course, in duel 1. You had Zane Smith, Jimmie Johnson, and you had Zane Smith and Chandler Smith in duel number 1, and Zane Smith was able to qualify in. Chandler Smith, unfortunately, had a speeding penalty on pit road, and it cost him an opportunity and a chance to make it into the Daytona 500. Then you get to duel number 2. In duel number 2, Austin Hill was easily going to make it in, but then we'll talk about the crash here in just a little bit, but he got involved in the big one that happened around 20 laps ago, and Austin Hill crashed out. And Connor Daly, who was rocking back and forth throughout the duel, he was able to make it in due to the issues in front. So he got extremely lucky. So that means that Zane Smith and Connor Daly make the show, and Chandler Smith and Austin Hill will be racing the Xfinity Series. They will go home and will not race in the Daytona 500. I feel really bad for Austin Hill because he should have made it, but he unfortunately got involved in the wreck that really wasn't his fault. Just really unfortunate situation, what ended up happening that could have been avoided for sure. But that means that Zane Smith and Connor Daly are in, and Chandler Smith and Austin Hill go home. They will join Travis Pastrana and Jimmie Johnson as the drivers who make the Daytona 500 for 2023. In general, I'm happy for those 4 drivers to make it, and I'm disappointed for Chandler Smith and Austin Hill. Really unfortunate stuff, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Tony Kanaan. As it was announced yesterday that Tony Kanaan has officially announced that he will retire from IndyCar and will run his final race in the 2023 Indianapolis 500. Tony Kanaan also announced on the day he'll drive the number 66 Arrow McLaren SP car, Arrow McLaren car. We already knew that he would be driving for Arrow McLaren. We just did not know the number at the time. Let's talk about Tony Kanaan. Tony Kanaan, in my opinion, is one of the greatest IndyCar drivers of all time and one of the greatest race car drivers of all time, and a driver that I grew up watching. He, of course, won the 2013 Indy 500 and the 2004 IndyCar Championship. And you have to remember, he won like 2013 with KV Racing Technologies or some team like that. For like, I can't remember, I think it was Jimmy Vasser he won for, not the fastest organizations in the world. And yet, he almost also won the 2018 Indy 500 and probably had the fastest car in that race. Tony Khan is a driver that people are going to remember for many, many years to come. He had that it factor and that fan factor like AJ Foyt had, and I think in general, it's really sad to see this truly is the end of Tony Kanan's IndyCar career. I think he's one of the greatest IndyCar drivers of all time, and it's going to be really sad to see Tony Kanaan go. But you have to also remember that Tony Kanaan is a much older driver now. He's like 48 years old. He'll be 40 at the end of the year. I think it is disappointing that he will not be retiring at the end of the year, but at the same token, at the same time, he's a much older driver now, and he deserves retirement after everything that he's accomplished in the sport. So, massive congratulations to Tony Khan on basically a fantastic career, and I'm very happy for him because he's had a fantastic career, and he 100% deserves retirement after everything that he's accomplished in racing. So, I'm glad to say that he's going to go out on his own terms. If he wins, he did say jokingly in the media that he did say if he won the Indy 500 this year, he might come back, which, let's be honest, he's with Aaron McLaren, a team that was one of the fastest cars last year and could have won the race last year. So we'll see what Tony Khan can do. He's got a good chance for sure to potentially win the 2023 Indy 500, which could be his final start. It would be great to see him have his Peyton Manning moment and go out on his own terms and go out by winning the Indy 500. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the media rights deal. Now, Steve Phelps, who of course is the president of NASCAR, was on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio and basically talked yesterday about the couple things that he's focusing on when it comes to the upcoming TV deal. The first thing he says, of course, was focusing on finishing up the next media rights deal and getting that done, and also talk about potentially expanding the charter system. Now, there's been a lot of talk, of course, about the charter system. There's been a lot of talk that they may expand it or basically give more money to the teams. Teams apparently won around $16 million, $12 to $16 million each, which would be double of what they have gotten in 2022 or before that. They're wanting more money and it to be increased so that the teams can get a little bit more money. But it also talking about expanding. I also believe that means that we're going to get more potential charters. I know NASCAR said that they were waiting on basically a new manufacturer to come in. I know they're still focused on trying to get a new manufacturer in, but still, they have not been able to get that manufacturer in. They actually had talked to Dodge, and they were really close to getting Dodge into the sport, but unfortunately, that kind of fell through, and that did not end up happening. That being said, though, it's good that they're talking about expanding the charter system and adding more teams because you have teams like Junior Motorsports interested, Nice Motorsports interested. You have a lot of teams right now that are interested in getting into the sport, even the money team adding charters. 2311 wants to for sure expand and get another car, a third full-time charter team for sure, and there's other teams that want to get in. Going back and talk about the media rights deal, that deal's probably going to get done by this summer, and I would have to imagine it's going to be NBC and Fox returning with potentially a third broadcast partner being Amazon, maybe during the summer months like TNT used to do, which I think that's going to be really interesting to see what NASCAR decides to go with and how big that TV deal is, how long it is, because NASCAR is targeting like the 8 to 10 year deal like they've done the last couple of years. And the thing I'm going to be watching as well with the TV deal is to see if there's any ways that they can adjust the TV deal to be a little more where teams can be able to get the money and such. It's going to be one thing to watch for sure, and we'll see what happens. It's going to happen down the road. Be very interesting to see what happens in the future. And we'll see what happens with the TV deal because that likely will be done by the end of this year. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about New York City and LA. Now, Steve Phelps also continued on but talked about New York City and LA and basically reiterates that the two biggest markets that NASCAR currently has is Los Angeles and New York City. He says that there are more fans watching NASCAR in New York City and LA than basically anywhere across the country. I don't think that's entirely the case, to be honest. I don't completely agree with Steve Phelps. I understand that he is, and he did say this too, that they have spoken to the mayor, Eric Adams, who is, of course, the mayor of New York City, and he has talked about adding potentially a race in the New York market. And obviously, that's something we kind of talked about earlier this week. On Monday, we talked about it on the channel, but NASCAR is in conversations potentially race in different areas, including New York City, Denver, Seattle, Canada, in other areas. Here's the thing right now. NASCAR is racing currently in Chicago. I know we talk about that on Sirius XM. In my opinion, I know NASCAR wants to race in New York City. We need to see how the Chicago street race goes. I only want to see one street course. If we're going to have street courses on the schedule going forward, we only should have one street course. So, for instance, if we race in Chicago this year, I know NASCAR wants to make some big changes to the 2024 schedule, but if NASCAR wants to race in Chicago, they race there. You can't have multiple street races because you don't want to be like Formula One. I know NASCAR is in a very difficult position figuring out exactly what they're going to do, but still, in my opinion, let's not just add a bunch of street course races and also just go do things because we're seeing growth in Formula One. To me, I think the biggest thing is going up to Canada and racing Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. That's what needs to happen, and I hope it does happen. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens, but I do hope that NASCAR does use their brains a little bit and decide to figure out and get things set straight and correctly. So we'll see what happens when it comes to this, but I think this is one thing to watch for sure going forward and down the road. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about Kyle Busch. Now we're going to be talking about the crash that happened in the duels earlier tonight. So with around 20 laps to go in the Daytona duels, in Daytona duel number 2, Kyle Busch was actually leading the race and had led the most laps. He led around 28 or 29 laps in his duel. However, with around 19 laps to go, Daniel Suarez, of course, drives for Trackhouse Racing, got extremely aggressive on the back bumper of Kyle Busch, and Kyle Busch unfortunately ended up wrecking because he had too much load in the left rear of the car. He ends up spinning out and hitting the outside wall and crashing out. Now, unfortunately, it collected Austin Hill, Travis Pastrana, Riley Herbst, and I believe Justin Haley also ended up being involved in the wreck as well. To me, when it comes to the Daytona dual wreck, Kyle Busch basically said it. There was no reason for it, and I completely agree with him. There was no reason for Daniel Suarez to be that aggressive. I understand you want to be aggressive, but you were pushing 2 or 3 laps straight, and I think that was a really, really bad move, what Daniel Suarez did. I think Daniel Suarez is completely at fault for the wreck. He was way too aggressive in that situation, and he did not need to be that aggressive. It doesn't make sense to be that aggressive, and you shouldn't be that aggressive, especially 20 to go. I would understand if it's like a few laps to go, but you cost Austin Hill an opportunity too, Daniel, a Chevy teammate. I know you got another Chevy teammate in with the money team, but still, I thought that was a bad move in general for Daniel Suarez to do. Now, I've seen people trying to talk about the wreck where Kyle Busch's head moved forward. He didn't hit the rear of the car, which we'll talk about that in a little bit, but I'm not as concerned about that he moved forward. Yes, he jolted forward, and that's a little concerning, but I don't think would have been as concerning if it hit the rear and his head went back. I would have been a little more concerned about that, though the Hans device did work as it intended. But going back to the wreck, Daniel Suarez did not need to be that aggressive. I thought it was over pushing. He crossed the line in that wreck and was too aggressive. I thought it was stupid and completely unnecessary from Daniel Suarez, but that is just my honest opinion on that. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch once again. Now, Kyle Busch was in the media center and he had quite a few one-liners, had a lot of great things to say to the media. The main thing, though, my favorite line that Kyle Busch had is he said, "I went from the Candyman to the adult Candyman." Kyle Busch's one-liners and how he's been in the media, in my opinion, ever since he left Joe Gibbs Racing, I have really enjoyed Kyle Busch. And don't get me wrong, Kyle Busch has been able to have a little more freedom when he was with Joe Gibbs Racing at times. But to me, in my honest opinion, when it comes to Kyle Busch, it's fun to see Kyle Busch be this way. And it seems like he's having a lot more fun right now, being able to speak his mind a lot more frequently and a lot more clearly when he with Rich Schultz Racing than when he was at Joe Gibbs Racing. And just seeing the things he's saying, it's been fun to listen to. And personally, I would love for Kyle Busch to get his own podcast because I would love to hear what he has to say in his podcast. And maybe we get a little more details exactly on what happened. Now, they had asked him about the Mexico situation, and Kyle Busch just said, "I'm not really going to get into it." What I said, which I agree, we don't need to hear anything more about that situation. I completely agree with Kyle Busch on that. But I love the Kyle Busch we're seeing at the moment. I think he's fun to listen to. I think it's great to see in general, and I'm happy to see that Kyle Busch is able to be the person he wants to be, which I think in general is really good for the sport as a whole. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Martin Truex Jr. Now, Martin Truex Jr. had been asked questions about his future in NASCAR past 2023. And Martin Truex Jr. got asked about that, and he says, if this is the case and that's happening, then I'll probably be back. As someone asking, will you return in 2024? He then went and said that quote that I just mentioned a second ago, and Austin Kanetsky reported on this as well. Let's talk about Martin Truex Jr.'s future. Martin Truex Jr., I feel like for the last couple of years, has been in the talk about potential retirement. I think that all really began in 2021, the rumors about him potentially retiring at the end of each season. And it's been a talk, how much longer is Martin Truex Jr. going to race? Because Martin Truex Jr. at the end of this year is going to be 43 years old. So he is going to be one of the oldest NASCAR Cup Series drivers. In fact, I believe him and Denny Hamlin are going to be the oldest NASCAR Cup Series drivers if Martin Truex Jr. does decide to return in 2024, which is certainly possible. And if you're Joe Gibbs Racing right now, you want to keep Martin Truex Jr. around. And here's why. Martin Truex Jr. has a couple things. One, he's got sponsorship funding from Bass Pro Shops. They've been a big loyal sponsor to Martin Truex Jr. really since the beginning of his career. And I would have to imagine that Joe Gibbs Racing could lose that Bass Pro Shops money. And certainly they don't want to lose Bass Pro Shops. Number two, it brings that veteran experience in. Right now, if Joe Gibbs loses Martin Truex Jr. Denny Hamlin, which is certainly possible, that will put them in a very difficult position and could put the team in jeopardy in general. So, if you're Joe Gibbs Racing, you want him to stick around next year, and you want that to happen. So, I think there's a chance he comes back next year. I think there's a chance, but honestly, I don't know at this point. I think anything is certainly possible. I think it's 50-50 right now. I was set 100% that he was going to retire at the end of the year, but I'm a little bit less saying he might come back next year because he won the Busch Light Clash, so I could definitely see him coming back in 2023. It's going to be for sure interesting to see what happens if he decides to return in 2023, but I will be watching it for sure and watching closely to see what Martin Truex Jr. decides to do in 2023. If he does decide to return in 2024, I should say, we're going to have to wait and see what happens if he does for sure, though, decide to return in 2024, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chase Elliott. As it was announced earlier today that Chase Elliott is officially joining the Coca-Cola Racing family of drivers. This is definitely really, really shocking news for sure that Chase Elliott is joining the Coca-Cola family of drivers. He now joins a small list of drivers who are in the Coca-Cola Racing family. Currently, the drivers that are part of the Coca-Cola family are, I believe, Denny Hamlin, Joe Logano, Daniel Suarez, and I can't remember the other driver Austin Dillon. That's the other one who's part of that. But he joins a small list of drivers in the Coca-Cola Racing family. I think this is absolutely huge in general, though, considering the Coca-Cola is a big brand in NASCAR and a partner of NASCAR. They've been really losing a lot of their drivers over the last couple of years. And I remember back in the day, especially a long time ago, when they had 12 or 13 drivers in the Coca-Cola Racing family. Like I mentioned now, they've only got 5, but it's good to see that the most popular driver, that being Chase Elliott, is now officially part of the Coca-Cola Racing family of drivers. I think in general it's really, really big for the sport to see that you have Chase Elliott being part of that family. I really do hope that, I know that is there only going to be associate sponsor for Chase Elliott this year, but what I would love to see is them do a throwback to his father, Bill Elliott. Now, obviously, I believe Lumar is going to be Chase Elliott's sponsor for the Darlington throwback race, but I think about Atlanta in the 75th anniversary of the sport, they could do a tribute or throwback to Bill Elliott, his father. And plus, because, of course, Bill Elliott was also a Coca-Cola family driver as well. What's also interesting about this is the fact that Chase Elliott was a Pepsi driver. He had Pepsi and Mountain Dew on his car. Then he had A-Shock and Keurig and Dr. Pepper branding, and now he's officially associated with the Coca-Cola family. It's going to be great to see, though, that Chase Elliott is part of the Coca-Cola family. I think it's really big for the sport in general, and I think Chase Elliott really could grow the sport with him being part of the Coca-Cola family. So I think it's really awesome news. Amazing to see that Chase Elliott is part of the Coca-Cola family of drivers now, and I think in general, it's really, really awesome and really great for the sport in general, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. Now, Kyle Larson had a lot of things to say in the media center about his future and stuff. And of course, he's going to be a long-term at Hendrick Motorsports. But Kyle Larson also spoke, and Bob Pockers put this tweet out earlier today, Kyle Larson spoke on the hits to the rear of the next-gen car. Now, a lot of drivers have been speaking out publicly about the rear hits of the next-gen car. We've seen Kyle Larson now talk about it. We've had, I believe, Chase Elliott might have spoken about it. Bubba Wallace has spoken about it. And Denny Hamlin has also spoke about the rear hits to the next-gen car as well. Kyle Larson also, like I mentioned just a second ago, spoke on this, and he says that the hits are definitely a lot harder than the previous generation of cars. Despite NASCAR's best efforts, they were working on this during this offseason, and they've been trying to make some fixes to the next-gen car with the rear hits. It still seems like that this is a big issue, and this is definitely a problem that has to 100% get resolved. We can't have drivers getting injuries, especially young drivers as well, getting concussion symptoms and all that kind of stuff. And we have a driver like Kyle Larson, who seems to be a little more used to it because of his dirt background, and he's been involved in a lot of wrecks, so he's definitely used to it. But even a driver like Kyle Larson, who's used to this kind of stuff, if he's talking about it, this is definitely a major, major problem, and it does 100% need to get resolved from NASCAR. I know that NASCAR is trying to work on it behind the scenes. We cannot, though, have young drivers retiring at a very young age. These guys are young. Drivers talking about these hits. Bubba Wallace isn't even 30 years old yet. Kyle Larson is only 31, is only 30 years old and will turn 31 in late July. You can't have young drivers retiring, especially the future of the sport. This has got to be resolved, and it does 100% need to be resolved as quick as possible. And if NASCAR can resolve this issue, the better it's going to be. It'll be great for the sport, and I hope that NASCAR can find a way to resolve and fix this issue because it needs to be fixed as quick as possible. And I hope that NASCAR can for sure find a way to fix this problem because it needs to be fixed very, very quickly. Otherwise, there's going to be more issues that are going to come into play, and the sport could be in a lot of trouble going forward because we got a drivers retire now, that being Kurt Busch. It would be really bad, and hopefully they get resolved so we don't have drivers like Kurt Busch retiring at younger ages because it's really concerning stuff, and it needs to be resolved as quick as possible. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Kevin Harvick. Now, we do have a couple Kevin Harvick stories we're going to talk to back-to-back, but the first story is something that Austin Kanetsky reported on, and Kevin Harvick has been asked by the media about, is he involved in the decision-making on who will drive the 4 car in 2024? And Kevin Harvick says no, he is not actually involved in who will drive the number 4 car in 2024. And even kind of reiterated and talk about how the fact that he tried to recruit Kyle Busch over to Trackhouse Racing before did not budge and picking up Kyle Busch. Now, this doesn't shock or surprise me, and the reason I think a lot of people think that Kevin Harvick is involved in that is because of KHI management, among other things, but also the fact that we've seen drivers be able to choose what drivers can replace him. I think Jimmy had a big role in picking Alex Bowman to replace him. I think also you had Paul Menard have a big role in getting Matt DiBenedetto to replace him in 2020, if I'm not mistaken, 2020 and 2019, all that stuff. But basically, in my opinion, the big question is who's going to go in that 4 car next year, and I think Tony will play a big decision and a big role in who gets in that 4 car next year, and I think Tony might be looking internal to decide who goes in there because that's a big question. Is Trackhouse Racing's future long-term is going to be something that we're going to be watching for a very, very long time. But it's going to be interesting to watch to see what happens in regards to that, what happens. But I think it's good to see that Harvick Harvick should definitely play a role in it because he does drive the 4, but I think this is when it comes to Gene Haas stuff. If Tony had a say, he probably would let Harvick choose who gets in it. But I think it's going to be interesting to see who Kevin Harvick does decide to put in that car because it's going to be interesting to watch. And we'll see who gets in the 4 car in 2024. But that whoever gets in the 4 is going to be interesting. I would personally think it's going to be Ryan Preece moving from the 41 to the 4. I think that's what's going to happen. And I think we'll be watching the 41 and the 10 cars who gets in those rides. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, and we'll see what happens going down the road. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of 3 major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Kevin Harvick once again. Kevin Harvick was speaking to the media, and he basically said that Dale Jr. told him this year this will be the NFG Tour, and Harvick agreed. That's a no F's given tour, by the way. He also says that if we have to settle scores, we're settling them immediately. Man, I love this. Kevin Harvick basically saying that if you're having any issues with me, and we've had any issues in the past, in trouble in the past, if you get into it with me, we may go into fights. We may fight on pit road. We might get into it. And I absolutely love this. This, of course, is Kevin Harvick's final full-time NASCAR Cup Series season. And I love the fact that Kevin Harvick is being like this, where he's basically saying, you know what? We want to settle the scores this year because I'm not getting back in 2024. This is it for me. I'm retiring at the end of the year. If we want to settle any issues between us, if any of us drivers have had issues in the past or any of us had problems in the past, let's resolve it this year. Let's get things over. If we have to take the gloves off, if we have to fight, I would love to do that. I really love this mentality from Kevin Harvick, and I think all drivers should have this mentality of the NFG, but basically not really given an F. I absolutely love it, and I think in general, it's really, really exciting to see that Kevin Harvick just doesn't really care anymore, and I absolutely love it. And I think this is going to be a great year to be a Kevin Harvick fan. I've been a Kevin Harvick fan for a long time. I want to see the old school Kevin Harvick that just doesn't care what he says. I love it, and I'm glad to see that Kevin Harvick is getting into this mentality because in general, I absolutely love this, and I want to see Kevin Harvick like this all year long. It'll be really great for the sport in general. Whatever does end up happening, happens. And I think this is really fun that Kevin Harvick is not really going to care. I think you're going to see Kevin Harvick get into some beefs this year. I wouldn't be surprised if you see getting in the beef with Joey Logano. Logano seems to have had problems with people. Wouldn't surprise if he gets involved with Chase Elliott again, though a lot of drivers do have respect for Kevin Harvick, including Chase Elliott, despite their issues from a couple years ago. I really think you're going to see maybe a spicy Kevin Harvick. Maybe it does become spicy on the broadcasting side of things, which honestly, he's going to be fun on the broadcast next year as well at Fox. But I really hope that we see a fight with Kevin Harvick. I think that'd be fun, and I'm glad to see that Kevin Harvick is being allowed to say what he wants. I think in general, it's really, really good for the sport, and we'll see how Kevin Harvick is, but it's really exciting stuff regardless for sure. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode as we are talking about Todd Gilliland. Now, Todd Gilliland basically revealed to the media yesterday, during media days yesterday, he revealed that he will run 5 races with Rick Ware Racing in 2023. The only race right now that he has not had set for 2023 currently at the moment is Talladega. And the reason being is because that 15 car is being driven by Riley Herbst, who, of course, is going to be driving the 15 car in all the Super Speedway races, that being Daytona, Talladega, and Atlanta as well. Now, why is Todd Gilliland driving Rick Ware for 5 races this year? Well, the big reason is because Zane Smith is going to be driving the number 38 car for 6 races this year. Todd Gilliland is going to drive the 38 car for 30, and then you're going to see Zane Smith in the other 6 races. Those other 5 races, I can't remember exactly. I think the Coke 600 is one of those races, and the other races are set. Now, a lot of people have been asking, why is he also driving for Rick Ware Racing as well? Well, another big reason is because Ford will not let him go outside of basically the Ford teams. I know people I've seen on social media stuff mention other teams, but he basically was told by Ford in front row that he can only drive for Ford organizations. But there is some significance in the upcoming update with Todd Gilliland, because I have a funny feeling that Todd Gilliland is probably not going to be a front row in 2024. And if you want a little bit of an interesting insight, very recently, it got reported that he is now part of KHI management. So he could be a candidate for that 4 car next year, or an SHR candidate. It is very possible. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's definitely certainly possible that we could see Todd Gilliland driving for another organization next year, which I think there's a good chance in 2024 that Todd Gilliland will be finding a new ride. But I am at least very happy to see that Todd Gilliland at least is going to be Rick Ware Racing. Granted, I don't think Rick Ware's team is going to be fast. I think Todd will give it the best run he's got. I think he'll do decent. The 15 car last year was way better than the 51 car last year. I'm just going to be honest. It was definitely a better car by a pretty wide margin at times. Ryan Preece is competing for top 20s in that car last year. We saw it fast at Super Speedway tracks. David Reagan got a top 10, and we've seen that car run really well at times. But it's a shame that he had to get in this position. I know it was just a business decision for him. I understand it's not really based on performance. I don't completely agree with that. I do think business did play a big role, but I also think for somewhat it was performance in some essence, in some way as well. That being said, though, it's good to see that he'll drive for Rick Ware Racing for 5 races. Yes, he will have other to drive for somebody else. I know that Josh Rayum, who, of course, drives basically owning that Finish Line Motorsports organization, which we've heard nothing about. They said they were going to say something on Monday. It's been nearly a week. We still don't know what's going on with that team. But still, I'm happy 100% regardless to see that at least we got some issues resolved. There's one race he still needs to run so he can run the full season. So if he does win a race and runs every single race, he can get in the playoffs. Because remember, You just have to run out every single race to be eligible for playoffs. Doesn't matter what team you're on. If you can go to multiple teams, if you run the full season and run every single race, you'll be eligible for playoffs, and that's for Cup, Xfinity Series, and Trucks. But regardless, I'm happy to see Todd Gilliland getting the opportunity. He deserves the opportunity. He ran well last year, times in front row. He should never have been put in this position to begin with, and it's disappointing because a lot of people looked at Zane Smith, made him look bad. I don't think Zane Smith's at fault at all. Zane Smith has sponsorship funding. There's really nothing he could do in this situation. But still, regardless, I'm very happy to see that Todd Gilliland will have a ride for 5 of those 6 races, and hopefully he can find that last ride for Talladega. I can't remember if it's the spring or the fall race. I'm not entirely sure, but he still needs to find one more race for 2023, and I think he will have a good chance of finding that ride for 2023. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Ross Chastain. Now, a couple days ago, Daniel Suarez and a couple other drivers have signed multi-year contract extensions. Daniel Suarez signed a multi-year contract extension with Trackhouse Racing. So we had asked, what is going on for Ross Chastain? Is he going to get a multi-year extension or not with Trackhouse Racing? Well, earlier this afternoon, it was announced that Ross Chastain has also signed a multi-year contract extension with Trackhouse Racing. Now, very similar to Daniel Suarez, they did not disclose how long the contract was for Ross Chastain, but basically I believe it was Ty Norris or Justin Marks who said this. He said that it's going to be till his beard is gray. I want to say it's about Trackhouse Racing. They're setting themselves up for a very bright future. Let's also talk about Ross Chastain. Ross Chastain has been absolutely really fun to watch at Trackhouse Racing. He's really been building toward this for the last couple of years. In 2021, he kind of started off slow, but near the end of the year, especially in the second half of the year, Ross Chastain with Chip Ganassi Racing was very competitive. And you think about his rags to riches story over the last few years. I remember back in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, he was driving for JD Motorsports and was running in top 10s and top 5s at times with JD Motorsports. Then in 2019, he was going to go full-time with Chip Ganassi Racing after winning in Las Vegas with Chip Ganassi. Then in 2019, goes full-time with Nice and goes on to nearly win the championship with Nice Motorsports. Yes, he had GMS backing, but still, he ran extremely well. Then in 2021, goes full-time with basically Chip Ganassi, like I mentioned, has a great second half of the year. Then last year, he has a massive year, makes the Final Four, scores 2 wins, albeit at the beginning of the year, but he still won 2 races early in the season, that being a Circuit Americas and Talladega. And he's a driver that I think a lot of people are looking at as a long-term future for Trackhouse Racing. He's going on, and I think he's going to win quite a few races over the next few years, and really for the rest of his career. I think he's going to end up being one of the greatest NASCAR drivers of all time, and I think Ross Chastain in general is going to win. If you want my prediction going into 2023, I think Chastain will make the Final Four this year. I know it sounds crazy to say because I've seen a lot of people predicting that you're going to see him fall off a little bit this year, but I think that you're going to see Ross Chastain have a pretty massive and a pretty big year with the Trackhouse Racing group. I think he's going to win multiple races this year. I think he's going to be a championship contender. I think he gets at least 2, potentially 3, or even 4 wins this year, and I think he's going to be one of the best drivers consistently over the next few years. But he's going to be smashing a lot of watermelons, he's going to be winning a lot of races, and he's going to be doing a lot of great things for the sport in general. It is also announced today that he's already sold out on sponsorship, which is really great to see. We're basically the beginning of the year, and he's already got sponsorship sold out. So I think that is very good. But then you go over to Trackhouse Racing. You've got 2 drivers who I think are long-term futures. Ross Chastain and then, of course, Daniel Suarez. Daniel Suarez is going to be at the team at least for the next few years. I would have to imagine he's probably in a similar position to Ross Chastain where they long-term are going to be with the team. And I think Daniel Suarez is also going to win a lot with Trackhouse Racing. And he's set for the long-term future as well. But now we talk about also the future of contracts. We've had a lot of big splashes in contracts. Started with Chase Briscoe signing a multi-year deal with Stewart-Haas Racing. And now you've got all of Hendrick Motorsports set long-term. You've got Alex Bowman through 2026. You've got Kyle Larson through 2026. You've got William Byron through 2025. And Chase Elliott through 2027. And then obviously, of course, now with Trackhouse, they're the other team that's really set long-term along with Team Penske. You've got both Chastain and Suarez set long-term. Both these guys are going to win a lot of races, and silly season in general is going to be a lot quieter this year than previous years. You still have Joe Gibbs Racing turmoil. We don't know about Denny Hamlin, his future, though. We know that he'll either be a Joe Gibbs or his own team, 2311 Racing. And then, of course, you have Mark Truex Jr., who could retire at the end of this year or come back in 2023, or 24, I should say. Then you've got Stewart Haas Racing, and that team's completely in turmoil. We don't know the future of that team in general, though I would imagine that someone from the team is going to move over to the 4. Maybe Riley Herbst gets promoted. Who knows at this point, but it's going to be one thing to watch long term. But silly season this year compared to previous years is not going to be as chaotic and is not going to be as crazy. But going back to Ross Chastain, I knew that this was probably going to happen. He was going to get extended, but I did not expect him to get as extended as quick as he had. But he 100% absolutely deserves the extension. I think in the next few years, he's going to be a champion of NASCAR Cup Series, and I'm very pumped and very excited to see that he's going to be racing for many years going forward with Trackhouse Racing. He deserves the extension. He's earned it. He's ran very good, and I'm very pumped to see that he is officially going to be with that team long-term for many, many, many years to come. He deserves it. He's performed great. He's an excellent driver, and Ross Chastain is one of my favorite drivers. Great personality, causes chaos. He's in the driver's known for all the chaos that he's pulled, but man, you got to love Ross Chastain and everything that he's accomplished, and it's a rags to riches story, and the fact he's not going anywhere anytime soon is absolutely amazing, and I'm excited to see that Ross Chastain long-term is going to be a Trackhouse Racing. He's going to keep this team and carry this team for many, many, many years to come, which is excellent, and Trackhouse is set up for the long-term future for a very long time. So, that is going to be today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Notifications on so you're notified when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Links description below over that. And comment below your thoughts below on today's episode. What are thoughts about Ross Chastain getting a multi-year contract extension? Let me know in the comments below. And what are thoughts about Todd Gilliland driving for Rick Ware Racing for 5 races in 2023? Let me know in the comments below. Later tonight on the channel, we're going to be talking about the Truck Series race that will, of course, happen later this evening. Then on Saturday, there will be the Xfinity Series race review. And, of course, there will be the reaction to the starting lineup as well, which will have a starting grid video on the channel on Saturday. And then Sunday, we're going to have Daytona 5 reactions on the channel once that race concludes. And we got a lot of content on the way. We're going to have double, triple, and even maybe quadruple channel uploads throughout the year, which I think you're going to be really excited about. So anyway, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for some more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.